everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about ebooks and digital content and a manager's role in the ebook debate and prioritizing digital content and collections. So, as an introduction, I just want to talk a little bit about how ebooks have consistently been seeing growth in the market for many years now, sort of since the invention of the Amazon Kindle. They sort of have proliferated the market and they've been very successful in doing so, but that growth has actually slowed in recent years, and because of that, libraries have been able to get some e lending options out there for their users. Before that, it was a very contentious relationship between publishers and libraries. Publishers didn't really see the benefit of providing e-materials to libraries in general, and it was making it very hard for libraries to compete in this way. So, with the lack of growth in recent years and publishers being a little less hesitant to work with libraries, the priority of the digital collection is becoming very clear, and I think that a manager definitely has a role in the ways that we prioritize that collection and make it not a secondary collection, but sort of the shining star of a library where we can really showcase the ways that we are competing with commercial competitors and the ways that we can actually do things that they cannot do through learning services and different types of things. So, as a background, um, there are two really big things that I think you have to understand the context of to sort of know where we should be going with e-lending and digital collections. The first is the relationship with the big five publishers and their hesitance in helping us get e-materials out to users, and how that relationship really does need to change if we're going to get the best deals for our users and provide the best service. The second thing is our relationship with aggregators and vendors. They've sort of been a middleman between publishers and libraries, and they have also created our digital platforms, which are often clunky and frustrating and not the best user experience that we could be providing for our patrons. So when we're talking about relationship with the publishers, it has pretty much completely been broken for a while. They have not been willing to work with us in a fair and equal way. They haven't seen the benefit of doing so. So they've been really unfair lending practices where Simon and Schuster wouldn't budge at all. They were not willing to work with libraries. Random House increased their prices above 300%, so we were paying a whole lot more than an individual would be doing. HarperCollins requires a new title to be bought after 26 uses, so that was making that incredibly more expensive. All of these arrangements are really just too expensive for libraries. We don't really have the money to keep up with that. So we really need to be doing a better job of keeping an open dialogue, which the ALA formed the Digital Content Working Group, where they've been pursuing that active dialogue, and it has been a slow process, but they have done a good job of showing the ways that libraries can be a partner that can actually help their sales and bottom line. They've sort of been a restraining influence on shifting to electronic overall because it's just been cheaper to have the physical books. A lot of people are still willing to read that because it's so much easier than what the digital platform is providing for them. So this combination of bad platforms and expensive ebooks has really made it to where, yes, your library has ebooks, but it's not a good user experience overall. So when we're talking a little bit more about aggregators and vendors, we're going to talk a little bit about how these are really not great technological advances. They are not good. It's not a good user experience. Working in a library, I can see the frustration when people feel compelled to get an ebook. Maybe the physical book is out or something like that, but they never seem willing to want to do that from the get-go. They're aware that it's clunky. You have to go through a few different things to actually get the book downloaded, and user experience is not a priority for these vendors because they're not dealing with these people on an everyday basis. They're sort of dealing with us as representatives and troubleshooting, but they're not seeing the way these people are interacting with their software, and it is not always pleasant. It can be frustrating, and we're really trying the patience of our patrons by making them use the software. Can also be called friction in general. friction where they are trying to download an ebook and they think it's going to be as simple as when they do it on their Kindle, and they quickly find out that that is not at all the case. It is much more clunky. There's not the same level of customization. Sometimes there are even too many options or too few. As far as ADA compliant requirements, there is not a whole lot of that. It's not easy to get people with disabilities reading digitally with the software that vendors are providing for libraries. So I have four main recommendations to sort of change the way that we prioritize digital collections. And some of these do have to do with vendors and advocating for libraries in the marketplace, but I also think there's a level of needing a reset for the relationship between authors and libraries, especially with the growth of self publishing recently. In addition to that, I think curating collections for patrons, sort of in that personalized, individual way that we always have been, can also really serve us well when competing with those subscription services in the commercial market. So these are the four main recommendations that I think a library manager has control over. I understand that advocating for libraries in the marketplace is something that library leaders are doing all the time, but I do think there's a place for the library manager, whether that's a director or a middle manager, in doing so. I think that local data that they have in their hands between the way that librarians and patrons utilize that digital collection is incredibly valuable for proving a point to publishers that we can be a partner that is successful. So the first of these recommendations comes down to the advocating for libraries in the marketplace. So I think that we need to begin by demonstrating how libraries have a beneficial relationship to publisher sales, because it has not been convincing so far. The argument that we have a beneficial relationship with publishers is not a new one. It's one that we have been making for a long time with physical materials, and it could really be the difference between a more fair deal and a very fair deal. If we can show them there are things that we can do for you that commercial equivalents cannot. I think a lot of this comes down to how interactions can serve as proof that libraries are the perfect place to recruit new ebook readers. When I have a successful interaction with a patron in downloading an ebook, that can transform their reading experience. They are open to that new technology now in a way that they weren't when they went online and they got confused and they exited out of the page, We might provide similar services as a subscription service in this way, and I think that can be troublesome. It's hard to show the ways that a library can be different when it comes to their digital collections. So we need to show them that these interactions where we are teaching and learning with our patrons is something really valuable in recruiting those new users. We can assist them in purchasing as much as borrowing, so we're there to help the publishers as much as help ourselves. Another way of doing this that I think is really the advocacy part of working in the marketplace is to create organizations that have more bargaining power with the publishers. When you're an individual library or a small consortia, it is a lot harder to get what you want because you're tiny. So there is one example that I found that I think is a good example of how to create more bargaining power, and it was the Commonwealth eBook Collection of Massachusetts. So this is a statewide consortia where they created a statewide digital collection that gave them better bargaining power. So when they're working together, not only is that good for resource sharing, but it's also good for the patrons in the way that they have many more options than they had before. But more than that, the way that this is connected to the marketplace is these library managers in a shared system are fostering relationships across state lines that can be strong relationships that allow for the kind of bargaining power that you get more consistent access to materials, because now you're dealing with a state's libraries and not that individual library. And that sort of collective bargaining power can be incredibly effective in the marketplace. So moving on, is that we really need management to get a renewed partnership with vendors and platform creation. We assist patrons commercially all the time. I show them how to download digital items for purchase, and that is a simple process. We need a more streamlined and simple loaning process for the library. Um, the main strengths of any library's digital collection is in the discovery and delivery of that information. So, solving the problem of friction when you're checking out an ebook should be at the top of any library manager's agenda, whether that be the software or not. So, we need more than troubleshooting from our representatives. We need to be partners in the creation process because we're the ones seeing every day what the users and even us as librarians are dealing with when it comes to this clunky software. It's not easy to understand, it is not intuitive, and we need more standards. We need to be working with the vendors or working through open source technology to create a user experience that has standards and protects patron privacy. There's a real danger in leaving the software development improvements to vendors without much local library input. And the first of these is how it affects the way that patrons react and interact with ebooks because it's a gamble. They might be scared away by that experience, especially if it's a frustrating one. And it changes the way that we have control over our patrons' information. We don't always totally know how those digital platforms are utilizing their information, and we should be in control there. It is really important to change this dynamic because I also think that it would be a much more efficient one. We're the ones dealing every day with this software, we're the ones teaching other people how to use it, and it's important that we also know how to create good digital platforms that really prioritize the user experience, or else they're going to go somewhere else and it might be a commercial space. It needs to be a relationship where there is a mutual creation between the aggregator and the library. Moving on, I think that participation in the creative industry is incredibly important and a very good opportunity for managers to have control over the way their local users see the library and how that they can support authors locally. There's been such a growth in self-publishing recently. The rise of self-publishing and the success come from the change dynamic that authors can have with both publishers and libraries. And libraries are often seen as an opposition to authors' rights because of how we loan things out for free. Sometimes authors don't realize the ways that libraries are helping spread their work. But more than that, we need to be not just loaning out their materials, but supporting their creative endeavors. So this could be a reset on author-library relationship in general, and prioritizing creators as much as we do users. So there are a few ways that we can do this. And the first of these is how managers could coordinate with their staffs to create programming that supports local authors. This can be writing groups, trainings on publishing software, providing guidance in connection with editors and other publishing professionals. We have that community space and we can utilize it to support the endeavors of self-publishing and local authors. We can showcase the ways that these local authors are providing creative outlets in our community, and we can support them in that. I think the last recommendation should be curating collections for patrons. And yes, we do this all the time since the advent of recreational reading in libraries. But these are two ways that you can prioritize your digital collection in a way that a commercial equivalent cannot. The first of these is the unique and individual collections that you can create from knowing your patrons locally. The second can be through demand-driven acquisitions and the cost-per-search business model, which I think would make it to where the collections are reflecting the patrons that they're really for. So the first of these is that we really need to be creating individualized book lists and collections for our patrons. And commercial options have a million, books that they can provide for our patrons, but it's too many options. It can be such an overload to the user. they don't know what to choose, and when they do choose something, there is a much higher chance that it's going to be a poor reading experience just because of all of the options out there. So we can curate collections that are specific to the users. We do this all the time. We know the patrons, we know the community, and we can provide librarians with the skills to give something that a subscription service cannot. We can still be that no-risk media environment that we have always been known for, but now we can do that digitally. Digital book lists, sending out emails to patrons with things that have been, bought recently that are online that they would like. It also means that we have more indie publishers and more diverse options in our collections because of knowing the patrons and knowing what they like. There's less of a risk in purchasing a diverse or an indie work than there would be for a commercial subscription service. We can market the library as a place for that individualized reading, and it can make sure that the patrons keep coming back. The second is a demand-driven acquisition, which I think is a really good example of giving control to patrons for what they like. So we're putting the power in their hands to say, this is what I want, and instead of them having to recommend it to us, they have the option of getting it right then and there. And this model is being utilized different places for different things, and I think that more libraries should be taking advantage of that. It is a little bit riskier on the budget, and you will have to commit more of your budget to demand-driven acquisitions, but if you're prioritizing that collection, you should be moving money to that budget line, and that is something that is directly in the hands of the manager in deciding what is important. In addition, Hoopla Digital uses the cost per circ model, and they're not the only one, but they recently made the news for getting all of the backlist titles from HarperCollins and Ebooks, and that's just a cost per circ model where the library is charged for the amount of uses on that particular item. And moving to this sort of ebook rental model, I think can be a better option because we're making more things available for people to check out, but we're not paying for all those things. So it's a good way to provide availability without that really affecting the budget line in a negative way. So those are the four, and I do have some questions that I think are worth considering. The first of these are, what are the pros and cons of a cost per search business model? We are using it at one of my libraries when we use Hoopla Digital, and we have sometimes had to limit the amount of things that someone can take out that month just to create a little less risky environment, because people take things out and they forget about them. They don't actually end up watching or reading them. So I just would like to know, what are some of your feelings on the pros and cons of that model compared to what we currently have, which are really unfair lending practices from publishers. My second question is, what are some ways that libraries could reach out to support local authors? I know that these programs exist in some places, but not nearly enough. And what are some strategies that librarians could use to make e-lending a more approachable option? So what are the ways that we can make it to where things are easy for the patron, because I don't think that currently they are. And then I have some references. Thank you for listening.